And we are all good to go. Well, thank you both so much for being here tonight. Tonight, I am joined by Justin Harnish and Mark Johnson. Justin Harnish is a writer, engineer, and nonprofit founder. He's the author of the books Dance to Spawn a Galaxy and Meaning in the Multiverse, and has collaborated on numerous patents and papers in semiconductor engineering and data science. Today he will be chatting with us about his latest book, Meaning in the Multiverse, A Skeptic's Guide to a Loving Cosmos. And he will be interviewed by Mark Johnson, who is a friend, an engineer, and a deep thinker. We'll be ending the evening with a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. So if you have any questions for Justin, please leave them in the YouTube chat box and I'll be sure to pose them. And then just before I turn the time over to the two of them, I wanted to go over just a couple of the upcoming events at our bookstore. On May 12th at 6 p.m. is our virtual LitKnit. We do this the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, and it's open to any kind of craft. If you'd like to participate, email Catherine with a C at wellerbookworks.com for the Zoom link. And then on May 18th at 7 p.m., we'll be hosting Justin Call on YouTube to read from his newest book, Master Artificer, which is the second book in his dark fantasy series, The Silent Gods. And lastly, if you enjoy this conversation, please consider supporting Justin by buying a copy of his book, and please consider supporting our bookstore by buying it through us. And I'll leave a link down below where you can do so. Right. And with that, I'll turn the time over to the two of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salem.
Yeah. I figure I'll start off by getting the conversation going, asking you a few questions, Justin. The first one I'll ask you is that in your book, in Meaning in the Multiverse, by talking about, you started by talking about why meaning matters. I think that's on all of our minds now at this stage in the pandemic and throughout the whole of it. Can you talk to us a little bit more about all natural universal meaning as you talk about it in the book and its importance for modern society?
Yeah, so I started the book as a business book, actually. I wanted to write in the same vein of other books that I liked in business, and wanted to write down sort of the strategic planning chain from meaning or purpose or vision to strategies, and then to tactics and objectives and getting things done. But what I found was there was not very much to say on business vision and a lot to say on personal meaning and the meaning of the universe, specifically in what I talk about as all natural universal meaning. So that tries to split the difference between personal meaning, which most of us find in some fit form or fashion, either through a mindful claim to experience, so something that we either flow with in our lives, we pick up a vocation or an advocation, more likely, that we really enjoy, and we get some sense of flow from that, or we're very mindful in our experience and get personal meaning from that, but don't find that there's anything out there in the universe that is speaking to that sort of meaning. The universal meaning that most people find, that some people find, is supernatural universal meaning. So that being the meaning that is given to us by supernatural entities like gods or goddesses, or a pantheon, or a monotheistic God that, you know, is the creator of the universe and gives us meaning that way. But people aren't taking the two and kind of mashing them together very well. And so I had a deep interest in, you know, as you know, we both work in science and engineering and STEM. And so we have a deep interest in the way that the world works and some of the modern conceptions of how that is being discussed in the natural sciences, especially physics and neuroscience, is really delving into some new things and some things that we can explore differently than we've explored the natural world in the past. Things like, and we'll get into this, a computational universe or a process-based universe theory that takes us out of just the standard materialistic approach and says, maybe there's a computation out there, maybe there's another law of the universe that we haven't yet discovered that is an optimization of sorts. And so the meaning that any society really takes on becomes sort of not sort of, it becomes a prioritizing factor for that society. And that's a little bit on how history has been written, has been on these prioritizing intersubjective entities, realities, as Yuval Noah Harari talks about them in his book, Homo Deus, where at first it's this belief in gods and religion that is over time, and still at this time, and I talk about this in Meaning in the Multiverse, sort of overtaken by a more humanistic reality and a meaningfulness that is driven not from outside but from within, and this personal meaning starts to drive our politics and our the way that we govern ourselves. It starts to drive how we interact in relation to one another, and how we interact in relation to our grander meaning and the purpose of life. And so my thought is that we are driving again to another one of those epochs where we're going to change, and the change that Yuval Noah Harari sees is into a more data-centric reality, and the one that I see is into a more universal conception of ourselves, taking some of these different metaphysics and applying them to our own meaning, and applying a more universal conception of meaning to ourselves. So maybe I'll do a little reading to sort of kick us off as to, how I talk about it when I have edits and the ability to think through things.
Yeah.
So, and this is from the very start of the book, Meaning in the Multiverse. Is life meaningful? Across time and status, this question has stood out as one demanding an answer. The implications of a negative result, that life is meaningless, is the actual question on our mind and goes unasked because it is too much for most of us to bear. We have struggled and loved, been cared for and parented, solved problems and anxiously awaited results, valiantly expended energy against disorder, planned, failed, succeeded, lathered, rinsed, and repeated. We are sure that at times, in our best moments, our efforts have not gone unnoticed and that they damn well meant something. We burden our poets, snuggle our children and smell their hair, and meditate in solitude to examine our life quest, whose object, as corny as it may seem, is the meaning of life. We look into the sea of stars and galaxies, dust and distance, and somehow, though we will never get to these places, made vivid by the most advanced eyeballs we have ever made for ourselves, our discoveries adhere to our explanations. We predict the makeup of stars from pinpricks of light, turn back the clock on cataclysms of creation to source what we see in the present from light emitted in the distant past, and dig into the next problem of material and energy that is dark to our light-sensing instruments. As much as we search, and as unlikely as it may seem, we see nothing that resembles the face we see in the mirror or the experience we see in our mind's eye. How can the stuff of this existence, so foreign, cold, hostile, and far off, contain anything of meaning for us? Is it all just setting the scene? Some are content that they have made their own meaning, that the lessons they have learned and passed to posterity are indicative of the right way to live, a proof positive path to purpose. But looking both ways before crossing the angry thoroughfare of history should cause us to forever pause on the curb of the present, because this is what every cohort has said, that it has learned from the myriad mistakes of its ancestors and passes on the true pearls of wisdom to its descendants. As we confront loss and even our own death, our appetite for intellectual dishonesty about the meaningfulness of life increases. We get into a destructive cycle of tightening the safety blanket swaddle of metaphysics, dreamed up to comfort us, that something out there shines a light in the darkness, a light that shines only for us. Most people want so badly for life to be meaningful in the grand scheme of things that they associate themselves with ancient beliefs that claim on insufficient evidence that a supernatural entity is actively making our lives meaningful. Another large swath pieced together a more modern belief that something out there loves us. This meaning of life is top down and very impressive. If God or the universe is concerned with our purposeful existence, we can rest assured that our deviations from the path will be minimal and that the ends justify the means. We can do what feels reverent, church, peyote, burning sage, and claims God's love only for our in group. So long as enough other people are feeding the collective cognitive bias, we feel safe being swept along the dark river whose course is unknown, but we are assured adheres to a larger willful plan. Others assume that human experience is separate from existence. Our inner life is not based on anything explainable by future scientists, and this subjective specialness is all that's on offer on the meaningfulness menu. It is not our carbon that is distinct, but that it is like something to be this collection of carbon that offers purpose, not just to us personally, but also poetically, where we act as the eyes of the world for the dead inside stuff of existence. Once the mind you've filled with as many points of presence winks out, so too does meaning. Your life is meaningful if mindful, loving, lived in a transcendent state of flow, or in the service of others, but life in general lacks purpose beyond the personal. One thing the advocates of a solely personal meaning have gotten absolutely right, that there's a lot to discover along the borders of experience and existence. If we take as a foundation that experience is meaningful, and this claim is hard to deny to anyone that has loved, had moments of flow in a musical, academic, or sporting performance, or paid particular attention to the profound mysteries of the illumination of the subjective experience of itself, then the place to start investigating a meaning from existence is in the realms where the distinction between the world as it is and the world as we experience it is most blurred or paradoxical. These are easy enough to find. Our relationship to space, causality, and especially our experience of time are in a complex and often paradoxical relationship with the physical or computational conception of them. An example that we investigate is the experience we have that time flows from one moment to the next, while time's existence is said to be frozen, another dimension like left or forward in space-time. As we become introspective of the experiences and take an honest look at the explanations for existence, like the many worlds hypothesis of quantum mechanics, our inquiries into the nature of meaningful existence seem more reasonable. We have been looking in all the wrong places to find a universal meaning for our lives. We have asked the questions all wrong. Instead of searching for meaning in the heavens, we need to first ask ourselves, what sort of universe would allow for all natural, universal meaning? This is where metaphysical speculation makes its appearance. Metaphysics has gotten a bum rap. This once august brand of thought, the philosophy of existence beyond which this once august brand of thought, the philosophy of existence beyond which physics is willing to speculate, is now colluded with every sort of happenstance claim of New Age woo and wizardry. We need to reclaim metaphysics from both the woologists and stoner dorm room alike, for it is a critical tool, advancing science beyond the lab bench of experiment to explanation, offering a consilience between disciplines in the humanities like philosophy with the sciences, especially physics and neuroscience, and enlivening the layperson's awe of what really lies just over the horizon of science in the speculations that serious scientists cannot, for a well-founded fear of incredulously being called a metaphysician, make. In this book, we'll untether our metaphysics and on these open seas find that our most creative conceptions of existence are relevant and vibrant thanks to the advances of theoretical physics and neuroscience.
Great, thanks, Justin. One of the things that you talked about in there, I want to ask a follow-up question, I guess, on. You talked about experience and existence, separate things. You also talked about them blurring together. And I wonder if maybe do you ever find that these two different ways of looking at life come together, they merge, the subjective and objective respectively? How's that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love, I love these t-shirt bumper sticker kind of things. There's only two type of people in the world, those that understand binary and those that don't, right? And the interesting conceptions of that. And so I think that experience and existence are sort of that two sides of the same coin type of argument for me, and I get a lot of mileage out of experience and existence as the two E words in Meaning in the Multiverse. Starting off with existence, this to me is the really the really exceptional side of what we can learn in the describable universe through physics and neuroscience and the sciences in general. This is a concept that I think should really awe us in the fact that the universe is describable at all. It doesn't have to be that way. And so for us to be able to understand the world as it is, to be able to encode it into our virtual reality, and to, given a high enough fidelity quantum computer and the algorithms of nature, we could create simulated worlds. And the whole idea of a simulation theory that creates complete quantum worlds is fascinating and is within the scope of the book, but is absolutely intriguing, and existence in all of its forms has that sort of power to excite and bring on reverence to people. But that on reference comes from within. That is not part of the natural course of things, at least as we see it from the outside, or from the inside rather. So our sort of first person experience of anything is behind the veil to a great degree, and it is a laboratory that you are the only person who can really experiment on it, and you can derive. It's one of the few places where we know we can derive meaning from, and the better use of our attention and our awareness is going to breed a fuller, happier life, and it's going to lead a different life than if we're just labeling things in existence at all times. So you might think that you understand what a cramp in your leg feels like, but it feels much different when you're sitting in mindful meditation, trying to trying to loosen that cramp in your leg without getting up and actually doing that. The more that you actually experience your body map in mindful meditation, the more that you realize that you don't feel your whole body. And the most classic conception of this is that if you try and look for your head right now from your side of experience, you'll find that where your head should be is replaced by the world and everything that you see in it. So, as a matter of experience, as Sam Harris says, and he's absolutely right, all there is consciousness and its contents, and those contents can be as mysterious as it from a first person experiential view as anything out there. And so we explain things in two different ways, and consciousness and how it interacts with the natural world and where it comes from is the vanguard of this. And so the conception that I ultimately get to is in finding that indeed consciousness is part of a computational universe that is the part of experience that breeds both the wave function and all of the subatomic particles that become all the molecules and macroscopic things in existence, as well as creating it is the same process for creating consciousness as the interference of entities in a massively parallel quantum computational computer that is at the fundamental that is more fundamental to existence than material, any sort of material, be that superstrings or information in an idealistic conception of existence, or for that matter of consciousness. Consciousness is less fundamental than the computations that make it up in this massively parallel quantum computer.
That consciousness is arising from the interaction of all those things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So consciousness is just like the interference that produces a distribution of particles, or the apparent distribution of particles in a single slit, single particle, dual slit experiment. So if you fire a single particle at a dual slit, and you don't measure at the slit which one it goes through, you don't put a particle detector at that slit, on the back screen of that experiment, you'll get a dispersion pattern as if you'd shined a beam of light through that. Now we know what would happen if we sent a wave of water through two slits. We would get that same dispersion pattern of crests and troughs based upon that wave, wherever it hit and interfered with itself at that dual slit, you'd see crests and troughs. Same thing as if you shoot a beam of light through that dual slit. But when you shoot a single droplet of water through that dual slit, it's either going to go on the left or the right slit, or it's going to crash into the wall. But when you do that thing with a single photon or a single electron, even more crazily, in my mind, a single particle of you can do the same thing with a proton. A single particle of matter, it has that same distribution pattern. And so what's going on there, according to the many worlds conception of reality, is that particle, that photon or proton, is actually interfering with shadow protons in multiple dimensions. It's one of the easiest ways to describe what's going on, not only in the single slit the dual slit single particle experiment, but it's the easiest way to explain what's going on in a collapse between two possible spin states of the same electron, or it's the same way that you can describe Schrodinger's cat, is that the Schrodinger Cat Experiment, where in one universe the cat will be alive and well based upon a perfect conception of the experiment, and in another universe that is no longer fungible with that universe, that cat will be unfortunately dead. And so the that interference between those alternate universes wave functions is just as good at explaining the hard problem of consciousness, of getting to a place where existence and experience are one and the same, and that it's the same mechanism, is that the interference of many conscious minds across what I call near parallel universes, those that are still fungible, that that can still interact in a single particle dual slit experiment, that can still interact with our conscious experience of the world. That interference pattern is what's also helping certain high information processing entities like ourselves to become conscious. And so that's the idea, the wave function of the mind, and a conception that I've also arrived at, where it's the same mechanism to arrive at a mind or to consciousness.
When you say mind there, are you using mind not as a synonym to consciousness, or are you using it as a synonym?
As a synonym to consciousness, yeah.
Okay.
So as opposed to a panpsychic conception of why consciousness arises in humans, is that there are many all things in this universe, particles, quarks, everything has some semblance of consciousness. I also turn that on its head and call it a parallel psychic consciousness, where now it's not required for consciousness to arrive out of material things, that everything in the material world be conscious. But in a parallel psychic conception, the mechanism of interference allows just more higher forms of information processing to be intelligent. So maybe the bat, probably the dog, for sure the human is a conscious entity.
Yeah, that's interesting, because with the idea that information processing and consciousness is coming from everything into, or maybe from all of the particles of our body into our brain, that's a little bit harder than to say, well, we already are observing interferences between what we suppose could be many worlds. So there's this direct connection that seems there. We don't have to suppose of another direct connection that we haven't observed.
Yeah, and the same thing sort of flows with our intuitions around time. So we early on in humanity's existence figured out that our revolution around the sun made a year, and our rotation on the axis made a day, and so on and so forth. And we got more and more sophisticated in building our conception of time. But as I talk about in the reading that I did early on, our intuitions around time don't necessarily correlate to what people feel is happening with what's called the block or the frozen universe, and just the idea that we all know about, that space and time are one. So we
It doesn't feel
about,
that way, right? We don't feel like we're walking across it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't feel like we're walking across it. We certainly are. It's moving through us in some way, but we also have this concept of the flow of time, and of course, our clocks and the slow progression of time when we're sitting in a traffic jam or something else that we don't like, our subjective flow of time. All of these concepts go along with one another, but if we discovered the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics before we discovered that the Earth, was rotating on its axis by some, crazy happenstance of science being, moving from more complexity to less, we would understand what David Deutsch thinks is the actual quantum nature of time, and how our apparent flow through time is actually um, our ability to, on a different axis from the one that we talked about, interfere across these multiple universes and flow through time in a manner that's consistent with entropy continuing to direct the arrow of time, and is consistent with the frozen universe that has space-time being all wrapped up into one. We can still conceive of space-time being just like a direction, like left, right, up, or down, but in the same way as we're in an interference or interaction pattern between many minds in the universe or in the multiverse, we're also in interference and interaction with many frozen universes flowing through this multiverse that is also directing us in a time course.
Let me ask you another one. I've heard that sometimes our intuitions shouldn't necessarily be trusted, and that some would see our intuitions as having machinery to them that are built for tasks that are not the ones that we're typically doing these days. But can you talk about how important and how you approach it in the book that we look beyond our intuitions when we develop hypotheses on the nature of the universe and of consciousness itself?
Yeah, and so we talked a bit about the big one, which I think is what I call the frozen flow of time. Even the words don't work, but I think there are many others. The idea that we that we walk around on the top of space time, right, and it's not integrated with our body, right? That that somehow what's inside of us is somehow not being imbibed by these subatomic particles or the fabric of space-time itself, whatever is at the fundamental constituent of nature itself. But these are all for the layman and just walking around in your daily life, things that if you're thinking about them, it is pretty hard to come up against these concepts and say, well, that table's mostly full of space. Well, yeah, it's mostly full of space. It's also, very confined energetically, and some of that, some of the nature of the table is wrapped up in those that frozen lattice of energy, as well as electrostatic energy, as well as the material that's in there, right? That's part and parcel to how they interact with one another. But even for somebody like the eminent physicist and Columbia professor, Brian Greene, this is somebody who has written amazing books on physics, and is author that I quote regularly in Meaning in the Multiverse. But individuals like that are doing science a huge service. Let me just say that out, flat, is that science is the best thing that we have to describe existence, period, point blank. There's nothing that's ever been better, and the error correction of science is absolutely essential to how we progress as a human race against any problems, existential in nature or not. And the materialistic conception that Brian Greene and most other physicists are are currently on board with is proven to 9 places after the decimal point in some experiments on quantum mechanics. Quantum chromodynamics is the most successful theory in science for its accuracy, for its predictive power, as well as for its spin-off technological advances like GPS and the nature of the NAND flash memory that Mark and I have made in our careers. But we get stuck in our intuitions that the progression of the last, say, 300 years worth of science is the direction that it's going to go, right? We get caught in thinking that this material that we're saying is point-like and without mass in the case of or in in the case of a quark or a quantum particle, point-like and without volume, right? It has mass. Or a superstring, right, which is not point-like and is a string of energy, but is not doesn't have volume, doesn't have mass, right? It's beyond where the Higgs boson is actually adding mass to it. So these further intuitions are just that, right? They're intuitions and not yet proven. Whereas there are other frames out there that show as much validity in something like saying that the theories that back up physics, the Schrodinger equation, relativity, special and general, are actually running the show. They're actually more like computer code or algorithms on a computer that are printing off existence, that are responsible for the bulk of existence and responsible not only for existence, but for experience as well. And so our intuitions can be flawed in that way. We can come up against Brian Greene's new book, and his new book Until the End of Time, which I highly recommend. It's great. It's a terrific read. He's a great author. But we can come up against his book and we can see that the materialistic conception, and it's a great one, but it only has one meaning, and meaning in the multiverse. And he discredits a few of the other ones, going so far as to say that he's doing it purposefully because that's out of the scope of his book. Some more of the idealistic conceptions where humanity's progress of knowledge really goes where I talk about it in Meaning in the Multiverse, creating these machines that ultimately become even super conscious, but investigating consciousness in that way is bound to help humanity progress in its science well beyond where we were at 30 years ago or even 100 years ago, 2/3 of the way back into the history of science. And so our intuitions are flawed because science has progressed very exponentially, and it's very hard to see around the corner of an exponential curve. People predict that AI might be 10 years away, that generally intelligent AI is 10 years away. People like Ray Kurzweil, and others predict it'll never happen. It's very hard to see around those corners, but those are some of the intuitions that I think that I'm at least more comfortable because I don't have to pull a paycheck from Columbia. I'm a little bit more likely to be able to explore as not a physician, not a physicist, but a metaphysician, and have a little bit more dynamism about thinking around those corners, and that we're not sure that it's a material conception at the fundamental nature of reality. there's good evidence that it might be consciousness down to that level. And Dennis Hoffman has written a wonderful book, against reality, that the case against reality. And I think that, some of the massively parallel quantum computer work that's gone on has also been very likely to have a place in our conception of existence. And with that, like I mentioned earlier, an algorithm can be an optimization, and that algorithm can tap into an objective function that is your conscious state of flow or your conscious state of mindfulness, your experiential well-being. And it might motivate you towards that optimum. So finding out how that works is direct meaningfulness from a multi-universal quantum computer.
Yeah, and that, it ties back to the beginning where you talked about how the way that we figure out our meaningfulness is going to drive us as people and society. It's important to figure out. I'm looking at the time. I'm just thinking, do we want to try audience questions? Salem, do we have any in the queue there?
I've got a few questions of my own. And yes, if anyone watching has any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat box. But one of the things I wanted to ask Justin about, you intertwine so many different ideas and modes of thought in this book. And I was wondering what the process of writing this was like. Like, how long did it take for this to go from a concept to a finished piece? And what kind of research did you need to do?
Oh, that's great. So it's 5 years in the making. COVID really helped to accelerate it, as I had a lot more time at home and in front of my computer and could finalize. I've said it before. I've always been interested in these concepts, but there's nothing like writing a book to really clarify one's thoughts about anything that you're doing. And so, like I said, it started off as a business book. I pulled all of the Brian Greene, all of the David Deutsch, all of the Sam Harris off my shelves, and am listening to those things constantly. In the last 2 years, I'm a 20 plus year meditator, but in the last 2 years, I've gotten very 2.5 years, I've gotten very aggressive about being a daily meditator, and it brought a lot of that into this book, and to my relationships as well. And so, but I think that for me, the process was having the idea that's really central to the book about talking about these metaphysical concepts. And the 4 that I cover are materialism, which again, it has the most scientific backing and is way out ahead of the others as far as its conception of turning its conception of experience, existence for sure, and experience to a lesser extent into real practical use cases. But then idealism is as old as materialism. 2 kind of concepts there. One is that the universe is made out of consciousness, or the mind of God is how it kind of started, but consciousness or thought is also a component of that. And then what I call neo-idealism, which there's a concept that at the fundamental fabric of reality, there's actually information, so bit instead of it. And that's a conception that, again, I'm just running into these books as I'm researching these these concepts, and I just am able to utilize these books that are coming somewhat serendipitously to me, and researching, as I go. And then the idea of process relational ontology is well backed up in by Alfred North Whitehead, was the one who wrote about it, but it's way back to Taoism and concepts like the way, which Taoism, Lao Tzu writes about. And in physics, we talk about the holographic universe, where quantum mechanical happenings on the surface of reality project, and that projection is the process by which it projects into a 4D space-time universe. And then we go deeper with that sort of process or computational universe conception with the many worlds, or a parallel processing universe conception. And so those really made the heart of the book, and enabled me to touch on, well, how does process ontology deal with experience, existence, and meaning? How does a parallel process ontology work with meaning, experience, and existence, and so on? And so it was that sort of nexus that allowed me to, and again, some of it is like Stephen King says, writing by archaeology, because the wave function of the mind, the thought of parallel psychism, or a whole conception like quantum computational neuroscience, which is this mashup that we need to start to understand in a academic discipline to really explore consciousness fully, if it is a parallel psychic interference from the multiverse. Those things come from writing and having an aha moment at 3 a.m. and rushing down to your notepad and thinking about that. But always, one thing I always have to say is, bounded by science. Like I want people to recognize that this could all be proven wrong tomorrow. David Deutsch could come out and say I was completely wrong about the multiverse, and it's been proven X, Y, and Z ways, and then 2 chapters of the book would have to be torn out and rewritten. And of my book, thankfully all of the chapters of his books would, probably survive. But anyway, bounded by science. That is a very important piece of all of this, is that it really has the best chance at taking what are metaphysical concepts in my book and moving them into either reality or the darkness of error-corrected speculation.
It seems like, as I was reading your book, it seemed like there were, just like you talked about, the different ways of arriving at meaningfulness. And just as you were saying, that if one of them or 2 of them we find out in the next few years that the scientific basis behind them doesn't work out, it's almost like the bets are hedged because there's these other options. Is that how you think about it? Do you think about maybe one is dominant and others are backups, or are they all kind of in the mix for who knows which one's going to be maybe dominant in 50 years?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I certainly have my favorites, probably because they're mine. But I do think that a lot of the striving in writing the book was to try and come to terms with the fact that, yes, there's this idea of an optimum out there, but in just our universe, we don't see it. Like we don't see an optimization running across our space and our time. It's not like the particles are lining up in anything other than as predicted by the wave function, by the Schrodinger equation. So that's where this sort of parallel conception comes from, and that idea. But But certainly if it is just consciousness, and that is the role we're playing as that's where the universe finds its profundity. And so I call this the eyes of the world meaning, right? And that comes from a famous Grateful Dead song by the same name, right? And the lyric in there is come on and find out that you are the eyes of the world, right? The heart has its seasons, its reasons, a mind of its own. And this idea that when you look out of from your side of experience, that is special beyond measure to the universe. As far as we know, we are the only things that are conscious in the universe. We're the only things that can take in its profundity, that can love, that can cherish other people, that can cherish existence to the degree that we do. And that's super special. If the universe can't do that and we do that for itself, that's way better than intergalactic travel. That's way better than being able to compute to thousands and thousands of decimal places the nature of any particle or the square root of pi, right? Whatever that is consciousness is still something that we can grant to the universe. So the eyes of the world meaning is a personal, prevalent meaning. It's only going to happen for all of us conscious creatures. It's not a universal meaning, but it is meaning for the universe, right? It is meaningful for the universe in such a way as if it doesn't have it, that can be all we're here to do, and that's super important. It's more important than any speck of dust on a crust of a planet in a galactic neighborhood, an indescript galactic neighborhood, right? Like we've been described so many times, right? And so yeah, it's important, and I think it is a bit of a hedge, because if multiversal quantum computers turn out to work just as well in a single universe, right, then we still have these other conceptions that are possible, and possible for us to reach through our science and through our mindfulness and through our flow experiences.
The image that you gave me as you were talking about that was, I've watched these Tesla autopilot videos where someone will put a camera behind the screen, or I guess maybe it's more general videos of just image recognition platforms in cars, and you'll see that they've got bounding boxes over features that they've recognized, right? And you could imagine a universe full of these things, right? It's got all of these cameras attached to some algorithm that's putting a green bounding box around a flower, right? And there is no sense of purpose there. And they could even be humanoid shaped robots that are doing that. But with all of those observations and all those identifying of the flower, there's no feeling going on. There's no sense of wonder for the way that it appears and the way that it is.
Yeah, it's another crazy one to that same sort of simulation theory. The matrix is out there idea is that one of the ideas of simulation theory, which is probabilistically, it's more likely that we're living in a simulation, right? But, for us to be in the base universe means that there's never been in the whole history of even many, many universes before us, right? If that concept, means anything, right? That never has been an entity that could create another universe like ours, right? So probabilistically, and this is Nick Bostrom and others have proven this out, that we likely live in a simulation, right? Well, why? is the next question. Why would anybody do this, right? And so, it could be the matrix. It could be, as energy for a machine, right? That's one conception. Another conception is that, it's entertaining, right? That's we do a lot of things for entertainment that are dumb, right? Or that are, seem energy intensive, but ultimately, if it's fun, we do it. But the other one that it could be is if you imagine these hyper intelligent creatures that are the uh, at such an advanced place that they could create simulated universes, they might be AI. They might have outlived their creators by eons, by epochs beyond belief, right? But never have attained consciousness. So they might be writing a simulation of the time where their creators were just about ready to create them to try and figure out how consciousness works. And so our consciousness is the experimental objective function for that simulate that ancestral AI.
Oh, interesting. So if we take those assumptions on, then the you could say that the virtuous exercise of our conscience is, in that case, the goal, right? And anything we can do to do better is better training, this hypothetical non-conscious AI to understand what a good consciousness is.
Yeah. They may be studying it to instantiate their own, right? Because it's this super hard problem. Maybe it's intractable, but they've never run up against a problem like it before, and they really, really want it.
Hey, you brought up process ontology. Could you just talk a little bit more about process ontology and its place in your book? Just for, I think maybe beginning for people who maybe haven't heard the concept before.
Yeah, same as computational universe. Basically, it's saying that, fundamental to the universe isn't it or bit, isn't consciousness, but is a process. So an algorithm, a computation, so in that conception, the Schrodinger equation, the wave function, the relativistic physics, both special and general, aren't just describing the universe, they're actually running the show, right? They are the code by which the universe is run. And it's, again, like in the Matrix, it's all code, right? It doesn't the universe fundamentally is this these algorithms, both known and unknown to us.
We've only got a couple minutes left here, but I just wanted to thank you both again for spending time with us tonight. And I also wanted to ask if either of you have any closing remarks that you'd like to leave our audience with.
I should go first, I think. Just, the only thing I'll say it really quickly, is that I think the thoughts that Justin leaves in this book are really refreshing, and they're the whole concept of an all-natural meaning, I think, is a great way to go about trying to identify what things we can place bets on and try to guide our formulation of meaning around. So I really appreciate Justin's effort in putting that into the book.
Yeah, I can talk these very theoretical, speculative concepts, but there's a whole part in the book that is a practicum around mindful experience and around flowing with existence. And so those two concepts, and I think that their use with experience and existence are really perfectly made to help us to attain those optimums, if that's where it's coming from, to heighten our conscious states to where, if life or the universe is some sort of game or simulation, right? What we really can say about winning that game, if you will, is that it's not about the money that you make or the fame that you possess or whatever measure is out there, right? We really want to experience this life to its fullest, and cranking that up to 12 has been well done by humanity through those two means, right? Deliberately practicing a skill, and and practicing and practicing and practicing until you get those flow states where you're in this timeless sense. And the other one is really honing in on what it is like to be in the present moment, at any time, whatever that present moment looks like. That's where you're getting all those gems on your game of life, is by not mindlessly floating through, but really organizing your pattern of experience to be as open to everything as you possibly can, and just continuing to work on that. It's like lifting weights for your physical health. Your mental health is improved by practicing this sort of mindfulness, by really honing your skills and building that sense of flow up and up and up until those times are longer and longer. I mean, anybody who hasn't watched the movie Soul should go out and rent it right now and watch it, because it really does a great job of showing how important the juxtaposition is between going after too much flow, and sinking your whole life into this one pursuit, and not rearing back up and appreciating it with all of the awareness that even your screw ups and your missteps, can have for you. And so there's a big theoretical part of this whole book as to what's at the fabric of reality, and all of that is fun and intriguing, but there's a big practicum on just good ways to really level up on how we are aware, and what it means to be in this moment, and in this beautiful place in time where we have so much understanding, and we have the ability to sit and really take it all in and appreciate its profundity and mystery all at once.
Well, thank you so much. That was a beautiful response. Yeah, well, this was Justin Harnish and Mark Johnson. The book is Meaning in the Multiverse, and we have signed copies available right now, if you are interested. And thank you again so much for spending time with us tonight. I hope you both have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank